Hello. Today I want to go back to my cat prints and I'm going to talk you through editing them ready to print. So this print here, the sisters, I wanted to show you how I've printed and edited the colour blocks for this. So here is the black and white that I started out with, and one of the decisions I made was that I wanted very much for this to have a kind of turn of last century, I should say, sort of illustration feel about it. So I've got an example here of what I mean. Now these are woodblock prints and they are by Nora and Hilda Exner, and they are Austrian artists, and you can see here the kind of vibe, the colours and the frame and so forth. So I was quite taken with the idea of creating something that had that kind of feel to it. This book, if you're interested, I've mentioned it before, it's called Art for All, The Colour Woodcut in Vienna around 1900, and it's published by Taschen, if you want to get yourself a copy. So I have been doing test prints, and here is a test print that I did. Now this is water-based ink, and I'm going to come back to the fact that I tested in water-based ink in a minute. I was using water-based ink simply because it dries quicker and I can write all over it for making editing notes. So when I come to do the proper prints, it'll be oil-based ink, but these are water-based. And I don't particularly want this heavy black for the finished print. I like the idea of mimicking that kind of soft woodcutty feel. So I'm going to try, when I come to print the proper set of prints, to use the roller in such a way with very thin layers of ink that I get this kind of softer appearance. So that was kind of good. You can see I've already lost the outline of the toe beans for my cat. I decided I didn't really like the positioning of those, so I took the outlines out for this one here. It's kind of spot the difference competition at this stage. And then the first block that I cut was this dark grey textural block, and I printed it up to check. I cut away a lot of the details of the black outline of the basket and replaced them with the grey block. So the grey block now has detail on it, and there's much less sort of basket texture in black, which has given immediately a more three-dimensional feel to that basket. So that was good. But I wanted to point out a couple of cutting errors here, because it's really important to keep an eye on cutting as well as colour and stuff like that. So here you can maybe see in this area here that I have this kind of pattern going where it's all sort of scratchy cutting, but unfortunately it all ends in a rather obvious angle. I suspect what happened was that I was cleaning out this bit and I forgot to soften the edge here. So that looks very, very clumsy. So I had to deal with that. And then over here, again, I've got this scratchy going on. And then in the middle of it, I've got these two U-shaped cuts, where again, I've been cleaning out, instead of using a V-tool that makes sort of scratchy marks, I've obviously been cleaning out with a U-gouge. And it's, again, here, you can see there's slight shapes that don't work with the texture, and they're tiny details, and probably it's just me that's being picky, but it's really important, because if you keep an eye on the tiny bits, the overall finish of the print is so much better. So it's really worth looking at stuff like that and being a bit pernickety, and then you get a much better overall result. So if we go on to this printing, so this printing is of the grey block on its own, and I've started to address this area here, and I've also worked out where I want the cat's pink paws to be on this print, so I'm much happier with that. And then if I go to a sort of full colour version. Ignore the colours which are not quite right yet. The yellow is far too bright. What I've done is I've put all my blocks together to judge where I am with them, and then I make lots of notes, as you can see. The actual alignment with this offset method that I've shown you in a previous film has worked really well. Everything's lined up. There are a couple of cutting glitches, like for example the yellow is overlapping here simply because I forgot to cut it off, and there's a tiny bit of red needs cutting away over here. But you know, they're small details. I don't have any problem with that. So again, I've gone round and I've just made notes where I think, like here in Doris's face, there's too much grey going on, so I'm going to cut a bit of that out. So one of the things that I have needed to do is to look at the frame and get rid of the underlayers of printing. So when I was originally cutting out the colour layers, if I show you on one that's still here, this one's a good example. This is the yellow one. I had left the frame in where there was block because I thought, you know, it's black frame going over the top, it'll hide everything underneath. And of course, if I'm now going to go for that kind of sparsely inked soft woodcut feel, it doesn't hide everything underneath. You can see quite clearly where there are areas of difference here and with the yellow block here and particularly here. So I've had to take the frame area out of all the colour blocks. Now, in this one, this is the yellow block, so it does the kind of basket and Doris's body, and you can see why it's poking out beyond the frame here, because that's the line of the frame, and I simply forgot to take off this tiny bit of excess. But now I need to take the frame off as well. Now, as you can see, most of that painting has gone, my offset. And that's because I've been printing in water-based ink. So when I was doing my test prints, I was using water-based ink, and there is nothing better at cleaning dried water-based ink off lino than fresh, wet water-based ink. So as soon as I started inking up, the drawing lifted, and in actual fact what I did was I inked up the block and then I washed off the block to get rid of the ink, the black ink. So if I show you the difference between two blocks, this is the one that's been printed up with water-based ink, and that's lifted the drawing. This one has been printed up with oil-based ink. So this is the this grey shade of the blanket here, and it's doing work as shadows as well. But because I printed this grey shade in oil-based ink, because I happen to have some on the slab and I just used that, it leaves behind all of the drawing. And it's important, if you think that you're going to need to refer to the drawing again, that you think about potentially losing the drawing or hanging on to it. Now, fortunately for me, all I have to take out of this drawing is the frame, and I can still see it, and I've got another one here where I need to take out the frame, and you can just about see where the frame is there. If those had vanished completely, then I would have to offset the line block back onto the lino to give me the guidance to cut out those areas. So getting rid of the offset drawing can be a problem. It can catch you out later. So it may be worth the aggravation of printing your test prints in oil-based ink and putting up with the fact that they're not going to dry as quickly, if it means that the drawing stays on the block, the line block impression rather, the offset stays on the block. So now I have reached that stage, I need to take off these frames. So I'm going to do that in just a second, but I just wanted to show you the colours that I've come to for this. So I have mixed up a few colours here, and you can see I've been playing with them to get to the right colours and mixing and mixing and mixing to get those. Now the colours that you see here are also going to be changed by how thickly I roll them out or how thin I roll them out. If you've watched my previous films about printing the landscape paintings onto lino that I've been working on, you'll see how you can kind of control colour by how thin or thick the ink is as well. So these colours here will also be changed by the rolling out. So I'll just have to kind of see if they work when I come to test print them in a minute. So before I print myself another test print, I just need to take those borders out. So I'm going to put down my non-slip mat and just take those away. So I've got a selection of tools here, and I'm just going to use a U-gouge and begin by running that up the side, and then I can go to a flatter tool and just take out the excess. Now, if you are new-ish to lino and the idea of just taking a gouge and running it straight up the edge of a line is a bit intimidating, then there's nothing stopping you from making a cut like I am at the moment along away from the line here, and then you can simply use the side of your tool to work your way up to it, and just do it in short lengths and work slowly so that you're comfortable with it. So there's no need to sort of feel you have to do a sort of terrifically accurate straight cut. You can kind of work your way up to it, and the more you practice, of course, the sort of more confident you get, and the easier it is to keep your hand straight. So I'm just going to finish this cut down here. The other thing to watch for if you're taking out an edge like this is not to go right over where the frame is. So I'm leaving a tiny little border because I don't mind there being a sort of fractional overlap of the blocks. I'd rather that than have white space. So I'm actually leaving, oh, probably less than 1 millimetre, just a sort of wiggle room, if you like, so that we don't have any white areas there. So again, I'm just going to come down here and come back on myself. Now I know that some printmakers like to use a knife to cut straight lines. I've never got on with that myself, but you know, that might be worth trying as well if you are looking for a way that suits you. Okay, so I'm just taking out the excess. I've also got this nice flat tool here. That's very good for taking out ridges and making sure that everything is nice and flat. So again, I'm just going to run that along there and take that bit out. So I find it easier to make the cut next to the line and then deal with that side of things after I've made that initial cuts closer to the line, because then you have like a protective trough that your blade can sit in when you're cleaning out the other area there. So I'm just going to take the time and get rid of that little ridge. There we go, that's that one dealt with. And then I have one more here. Now this block here, which is the golden, the yellow colour, Doris is actually sort of biscuit coloured rather than bright yellow. But one thing that I did like in this print was Betty's bright yellow eye. So I've just popped myself a little protective stencil there so that I can block the eye off when I'm inking up Doris, and then ink the eye up separately a bright yellow colour. So that's more to remind me at the moment than to serve a useful function. So last bit of frame, and I can go on with printing. I'm just going to go back in. It's always worth taking the time to check that you haven't created a sort of edge and then a ridge, because if you have, it can catch the ink and just give you a nasty little line next to your printed shape. So it's always worth sort of going back and making sure it's really clean. So that's all my blocks ready to print, and the next thing I'm going to do is a test print over at the press. So now I've tidied up my blocks, I'm going to do another test print. This time I'm going to try the oil-based inks because I want to start getting the colours right for the final print. So I have some rough paper on the press to try, and I've got this little mask here for Betty's eye to remember to deal with. So I'm going to start with Doris's fur and the basket colour, and I've got the ink rolled out fairly thin because remember I want that kind of sort of retro-y kind of feel to it. And I'm going to pack the press with a couple of sheets of card. I may need more pressure, but I want to see how that goes. So if I'm in any doubt, I always sort of put less pressure than I think I need and then add pressure. So that's not looking bad. I might just put a little bit more on. So when it comes to actually printing these artist support pledge prints, what I'll do is I'll mix myself up a correct amount of the right sort of ink to begin with, so there won't be all this toing and froing and adding extra layers and stuff like that when I'm doing those. So now it's time to do Betty's yellow eye, and I'm just going to clean that off. And I'm going to move my mask just to be quite sure, and little roller here. If this were any smaller, I would probably use my thumb to put the ink on rather than a roller. But actually, let's get this out of the way. Lovely. So now I have a bright yellow eye and the sort of biscuit colour of Doris. She's in the studio in her basket at the moment, so I have got her here as a colour reference if I need her. And now I'm going to go on to the next block, which is the background red and the pink of her pads on her feet. yeah, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to print the grey blocks next. Before I get onto the grey layers, I just wanted to show you the colour layers that I've just printed. So I quite like, this is the kind of feel I wanted for the inking. You see it's not completely dense there. And we've got the nice little yellow eye there and the pink feet for Doris. So the next thing to do is to get the greys on, and I might have to do a little bit of adjustment with the greys because I'm not quite sure I've got them right. Now I can see as I'm rolling this out that that is going to be too pale, so I'm going to pinch a bit of the darker grey and add it in. Greys are always a bit tricky to get right, so it does take a bit of testing. And I just want to show you this layer, and you can see how it's laying down shadows, and there are some slight overlaps and underlaps, but that'll all be hidden by the darker blocks there. Just needs a little bit darker, so I'm going to give it another coat. Normally I would mix the grey darker, but just to save time I'm going to just give it another coat. So now to show you, I've just put in these darker areas here around her foot, and I'm using much less pressure than I would normally ever use, but it is giving this kind of nice kind of woodblocky feel to it. So now I need to put the final layer, the black, on. So now I'm going to print the last layer, and that's going to be the black. I am using Cranfield's Blue Black, which I've newly discovered, and I really like this colour because it's very, very subtle, but there's a kind of depth to it that I really enjoy. And since I'm going to be rolling out the ink very, very thin indeed, it'll play to the strengths of this blue-black colour. So now I've put my layer of blue-black on, I'm going to take an impression and see what we've got. I'm going to keep the pressure low, so a couple of pieces of card here. I'm trying to keep that kind of stipply feel. Okay, so got something going on here which I need to look at the block about, but otherwise overall I'm really pleased with it. I still think Doris is a bit yellow. I could make her a little brownier, but you see how well that golden eye shows up. I'm really pleased with that. And I might just adjust this darker grey to be a little bit darker so that there's less contrast with the black there. But otherwise, overall, I'm really pleased with that. So I now have to make a few adjustments and then I will be able to make the print. I hope you've enjoyed the film and I hope you'll join me again.